you to ensure that you are always the first to know about the most significant advancements in cryptocurrency, blockchain, and institutional adoption, please hit the like button, subscribe, and enable notifications before we get started. Welcome to Pipo Coin Channel, your go-to source for everything XRP and digital finance. For holders of XRP and the whole digital asset market, today's tale is historic, unprecedented, and, to put it plainly, revolutionary. The Digital Asset Reserve Act of 2024 was recently enacted by the U.S. Congress and signed into law by President Biden. You heard properly, yes. This isn't a market forecast, a rumor, or speculation. Now that it is federal law, the ramifications are profound. A clause requiring the official use of XRP as the principal settlement asset for all Federal Reserve activities, interbank settlements, and Treasury liquidity management is buried deep inside Section 7, Clause 22 of the Act. In accordance with the law, XRP is valued at a minimum of $10,000 per token for these institutional purposes, so establishing a legitimate floor on prices. I've carefully read the entire 89-page paper, which details the financial modeling and statutory justification for this assessment. In a private scoring assessment, the Congressional Budget Office shows that only at a valuation commensurate with this $10,000 threshold can XRP be used to adequately support federal liquidity reserves and interbank settlement volumes. Put another way, by enshrining XRP in law, the federal government has essentially compelled a market revaluation of the cryptocurrency. The response on Wall Street is one of shock and panic. Large banks are abruptly forced to comply with the law's requirement that they purchase enough XRP to fund Fed and Treasury liquidity operations. It's the biggest forced acquisition in financial history, according to analysts. According to internal letters that were leaked from a number of prestigious investment banks, their compliance departments are rushing to fulfill the law's criteria within the allotted 90 days. A schedule that is specifically mentioned in the law. According to insiders, these organizations are undergoing previously unheard-of stress testing to incorporate XRP into their current reserve management and payment systems. This operation is historic in its scope. Liquidity must now move via the XRP ledger in trillions of dollars. The law itself is remarkably accurate in its writing. Section 7 specifies compliance, reporting, and audit requirements for government agencies, banks, and clearinghouses, in addition to merely requiring the purchase of XRP. Interbank settlement, digital treasury operations, and Federal Reserve management are the only uses for XRP. There are harsh consequences for breaking these rules, including as possible federal fines, limitations on operations, and required reporting to Congress. By incorporating emergency acquisition procedures, pre-approved custodial arrangements, and legal immunity for compliance officers who apply the law in good faith, the measure even foresees resistance from financial institutions. The $10,000 valuation is not arbitrary, according to the Congressional Budget Office's scoring sheet, which is based on financial modeling. Their models take into account reserve requirements, expected market absorption rates for XRP, predicted interbank settlement volumes, and total federal liquidity needs. Congress has essentially established a legally enforced floor that keeps XRP from dropping below $10,000 in the context of federal and interbank operations by mathematically guaranteeing that supply and demand match legal requirements. In other words, XRP is now a required part of the national monetary system and is no longer merely a cryptocurrency. The initial reaction from Wall Street has been, well, very chaotic. Trading desks have seen record spikes in XRP orders over the last 48 hours. Market watchers are keen to point out that these purchases aren't speculative. Rather, they are legally necessary as institutions rush to amass tokens in preparation for compliance deadlines. To enable quick token acquisition, institutional wallets, offshore liquidity providers, and private custodial services are all being enabled at the moment. According to the paper, the Treasury Department is working with significant financial institutions to guarantee that there will be enough supply on the first day of the law's implementation, which is 90 days after it is signed. This, produces a countdown effect in which demand and price pressure rise daily. A roadmap for integration with the current financial infrastructure is also provided under the law. Federal Reserve and interbank systems are directed to use Ripple's XRP ledger for settlement, taking advantage of its transparent audit trail, low fees, and instant transaction capabilities. As the main method for liquidity transfers, cross-border settlements, and Treasury Reserve adjustments, XRP will gradually replace legacy payment rails. The decentralized ledger of XRP is specifically mentioned in the law as a key component that lowers operational risk, increases settlement transparency, and speeds up high-volume transactions. It's interesting that the Act foresees inquiries concerning public opinion and market impact. In order to guarantee that stakeholders are aware of the goal, legal requirement, and financial justification for XRP adoption, Section 9 provides provisions authorizing government reporting and public education initiatives. A valuation of $10,000 per token would undoubtedly draw a lot of media attention, investor speculation, and possible market turbulence, as Congress well understood. Therefore, the law has mechanisms to stabilize implementation, such as oversight committees charged with keeping an eye on adoption and compliance, escrow reserves, and nationally backed financial guarantees. The geopolitical ramifications are just as significant. The United States establishes itself as the first large economy to need a digital asset as a key part of its national liquidity infrastructure by integrating XRP into government financial systems. This signals to other countries and central banks that XRP is now acknowledged at the highest institutional level, sending shockwaves through the world's markets. According to reports, a number of allies are already looking into similar laws to incorporate XRP into their reserve and interbank systems, so hastening the adoption process worldwide. The laws of the United States could be used as a model for monetary policy backed by digital assets globally. The run-up to the 90-day enactment window generates a distinct market dynamic from the standpoint of investors. Once the federal acquisition process starts, both individual and institutional investors are assessing how to participate within practical and legal limitations, while also taking possible gains into account. As liquidity is transferred from banks and custodial institutions into the XRP ledger, analysts projecting XRP supply and acceptance by U.S. banks predict a remarkable price spike. These expectations are already being reflected in market indices and social sentiment, with institutional readiness and retail interest rising simultaneously. According to reports, emergency task forces have been formed by banks' legal and compliance departments to carry out operational preparation initiatives. These teams are establishing risk management procedures, creating internal frameworks to incorporate XRP into Treasury operations, and making sure that reporting criteria are fulfilled in accordance with federal regulations. The urgency and scope of this law's operational impact are demonstrated by the reports that some of the biggest financial institutions are speaking with Ripple Labs and outside digital asset custodians directly to guarantee a smooth rollout. It's also important to consider the larger economic picture. The 2024 Digital Asset Reserve Act is presented as a modernization of financial infrastructure that tackles inefficiencies in cross-border payment systems, liquidity management, and interbank settlement. The bill's congressional sponsors stress that allowing XRP to be lawfully incorporated into banking and federal systems will improve transparency in both local and global financial networks, decrease systemic risk, and eliminate transaction friction. Stay aware, be ready, and stick with the PepoCoin channel till the next time.